Let's continue on to part two. So now that we've completed the questions in part one and hit submit, it now opens up part two. So let me show you what part two is showing. So part two is showing all of the data that you pasted in. If you didn't have it sorted initially like I did, right, you can see here the first value was 120, the second value was 100. And in here in this table, you can see the smallest value is first, and the highest value is last. So that value of 120 was the second to the highest value in my list. Um, this table of values is also 10 columns wide. So if you needed to count yourself how many there were, you could just count by tens. But I programmed it to go ahead and tell you, how many data values you pasted in. So there are 241 for me anyway. There's 241. So here, I've got a caption for the table. So this is a data table of X values of the random variable speed, miles per hour. This is what I typed in up above here in question 0. And it gives a sample size. So the sample size is 241. And now what we need to do is decide what we want our starting point to be. And this question, coincides with our histogram design worksheet. So here on step 1 of designing a histogram, it's to choose a starting point using methods A, C, or D. So method A is to choose a starting point that's equal to the minimum. Method C is to choose a starting point that is 0. And method D is to choose a starting point that is less than the minimum. And if we come back over, so we see we have these options A, C, and D. Those are the same options that you've got here in the MyOpenMath problem, A, C, and D, where A is a starting point that's equal to the minimum of your data set, C is the starting point of 0, and D is the starting point that's less than your minimum. And so the question 2 here is, which method do you want to use, A, C, or D? So let's come back over to our worksheet and just kind of progress with things as we go along here. So first thing I want to note is we've got 241 datums here in this random variable. So I'm going to come over to my worksheet, and here under sample size, I'm going to type in 241. All right, and the highest number of decimal places of accuracy for my random variable. Well, let me go back into my spreadsheet. And, as I look at the datums in this random variable, looks like the maximum number of decimal places of accuracy is going to be 1, right? 1 decimal place. Some of them have 0 decimal places, but most of these have 1. Let me see here. Yep. And I can see that here as well. It looks like the maximum number of decimal places is 1. So let me go ahead and record that. I may not need it, but just in case, let's put that in there. All right. And we need to identify, which software package we're using. So right now, I'm using Google Sheets. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that. And so because I'm using Google Sheets, this is how it defines each class, where it does not include the lower bound of the class, but it does include the upper bound. And so what that means is, since we're using Google Sheets, we can't use as our starting point the minimum value. All right, so this option cannot be used with Google Sheets because if we use the minimum value for our starting point, then that starting point won't be included in our first class. And this is something that we talked about in class. Um, so we can't do that. So in this case, I'm going to have to use either 0 or some value less than the minimum value. All right, but let's pretend um, that you had a data set and it was quite large and you didn't know what your minimum was. Okay, you know it's your minimum is somewhere here, but you're not quite sure where. So let me show you how to program the spreadsheet to just tell you what the minimum is. Now we sorted this and I can see it, right? Granted, but I want to use this as a teachable moment to teach you how to do more with the spreadsheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to label this cell minimum, put in equals, and I'm also going to find the maximum. So I'm just going to type maximum, hit enter. Now, here's probably the one of the key, most important things I can teach you, about getting started with spreadsheets, is that if you just type whatever you want, you can, and the spreadsheet's going to think you're just typing in text. It doesn't really care. But as soon as you type in an equal sign, that suddenly perks the attention of your spreadsheet software. When you type an equal sign first, it's like, oh, okay, the user, you wants to do something special, wants to do a calculation, wants to use a function. Okay. And so, for example, let me just if I were to put 2 plus 1 and hit enter, it doesn't do anything with it because it thinks that's just text. But instead, if I start this with an equal sign and I put 2 plus 1, now it recognizes that I want to do a calculation. And if I hit enter, it'll actually do it. It'll actually add 2 plus 1. And so notice here that when I click here, it gives me the result. But up here in the formula bar, it says equals 2 plus 1. So this is the formula that I put in to this cell. And then this is the result. All right. So whenever you're going to do a calculation or use a function in the spreadsheet software, you always want to start it with an equal sign. So here I used an equal sign and typed in an equation, all right, that I want it to calculate. But what if I want to use a function? What's that? So a function is kind of like a script or a little mini program that's kind of built into the spreadsheet. And one of the ways to get to them is to actually just kind of start typing in the name of the function. And usually the functions have names that are exactly the same as what you're looking for. So if, for example, I'm trying to find the minimum of a data set, I'm trying to find a minimum of a range of numbers. So if I start typing in the word min for minimum, it's going to give me some choices here. Like, oh, did you mean this? Did you mean this? Did you mean this, or that? And what you can do is you can hover your cursor over it. And so this min function is the minimum value in a numeric data set. So I'm going to left click on that. And notice now it's accepted that. And now we have this minimum function and it has this left parentheses. Now, all the functions in a spreadsheet will have the name of the function followed by a left parentheses and a right parentheses. What it's expecting between the parentheses is something called an argument. It's expecting some kind of input from you because, all right, fine, you want to use the minimum function. That's great. What do you want me to find the minimum of? And so what we want is we want to find the minimum of this range of cells from A2 down to the very last one. Now, it's guessing correctly what I want to calculate the minimum of, but in order to show you how to control this, I want to show you how to do this manually. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to select this range of numbers. Now, I can't just select the column because that's going to include speed in here, and I don't want that. All right. So be careful as you click around. Notice as I click around, it's automatically putting that value in here. Okay, so just be aware of that. But what we want to do is we want to select the first row of data that you have. And notice it puts A2. And then you want to scroll down to the last one. Oops. Scroll down to the last one. And if you hold down the Shift key and click the mouse button, left mouse button here on Windows, it's going to select every row in between the first and the last one. And remember, you have to hold down the Shift key. And here it's typed in A2 colon A242. So A2 is our first cell, A242 was the last cell, and the colon means everything in between. So now to finish this off, I can just now type in a right parentheses. And if you're having trouble kind of seeing what it did here, you can look up here in the formula bar. So we have equals minimum left parentheses A2 colon A242 right parentheses. And if I hit enter, it's going to return the minimum value from all of those rows of data. So if I didn't sort this and kind of know right off the bat that this was the smallest number, I could use this function to find it buried in this list of numbers. Because in your job or in another class you're taking, you might not have to or be able to sort this. Okay. In which case, you're going to want to just be able to find the minimum. And so this is a way you can do it. So now we can do that to find the maximum. So let's go ahead and do that as well. So again, we start this with an equal sign and start typing maximum. And notice that it's given us these three options that start with the letters MAX. And so I want to click this first one, max, which is maximum value in a numeric data set. And previously, I clicked and I hit the Shift key and I clicked the last cell. You can also just type it in. So if I already know what it is, it goes from A2 to A242. And notice as I typed that in, right, as I typed in A2, it selected that cell. And then I put colon. And if I put A242, notice how it selects all of that. And then right parentheses. And if I hit enter, it's going to give me the maximum value. Now, notice that the spreadsheet software is smart enough to know that even though I typed in a lowercase a, it knows that I mean uppercase A, just because of the way that I've typed it in. And so I'll hit enter. And so the maximum value was 149.1, which coincidentally, because I sorted this, is the last row of data in this sorted list. Okay, so I wanted to sort this ahead of time so you could see that when I use this function later, you know what it's doing and why. Okay, and again, in order to tell the spreadsheet that you want to do a calculation or use a function, you want to start with an equal sign. You'll notice here when I typed in the word minimum, I didn't start by hitting equals and type in minimum. I typed in minimum first and then an equal sign, and it didn't do anything, right? It's because I didn't hit the equal sign first. So when you don't type in an equal sign first, and you type it in later, it just considers the equal sign typed in later to just be text, and it kind of ignores it. All right. So, this was instructive because we wanted to find the minimum. So let's come back over to our worksheet, and I could either, actually, let's put in the minimum. So I think my minimum value was 4.5. So let me type that in. And the maximum value for me, over here, you could write this in. I'm just typing it in because it's easier for me to do that right now. Okay, I believe was 149.1. Is that correct? I can always come back and check. Yeah, 149.1. And so I need my starting point. Um, so I could start at 0. That would work. Or I could start at a value that's a little less than my minimum. So I could start it at 4, for example. But I think for myself, because since this is so close to 0 anyway, I'm going to have a starting point at 0. All right, and let's kind of come over here to our spreadsheet again. And let's just type that in. We're going to have a starting point, and I'm just going to type in 0, just to have that recorded. And let's go to the MyOpenMath problem. And it's saying, what method do you want to use? So since I'm choosing a starting point of 0, I'm going to be using method C. And then down below it says, which device or software method do you want to use? Are we using our calculator? Are we using Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel? So I am using Google Sheets. So I'm going to type that in. And then what was our starting point? Our starting point, or my starting point, is 0. And pay attention to the accuracy. So I want to put 0.0. And if I've entered that all in correctly, if I hit submit, it should let me on to the next part. So here is this method, C, starting point of 0. We're using Google Sheets, so I put in uppercase Y, and the starting point is 0. It took that, and now it's let us out onto part 3. So let's go ahead and stop here, and we'll start the next video here at part 3.